Awesome. So, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Israel Unfiltered with Yoel Israel. I'm really excited for our guest today. We have with us Pamela Cohen. Pamela Cohen is an author, an advocate for human rights, and specifically for Jewry from the Soviet Union. And she has actually a lot of share for us to get a better idea. A lot of times we talk about the challenge Jews have, and we talk about the Western world, but also often we overlook what's going on in the Eastern world, particularly in Soviet Union. That also includes refuseniks, those that are Jews who are trying to emigrate out of the Soviet Union and haven't managed to, how they got out, and the support and the help that they had from Israel, America, and specifically activists in the United States that were able to actually make a big difference in policy to help Jews get out. And with that, there's probably one of the most important names in recent history for human rights and Jewish human rights in particular is Pamela. Pamela, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Yoel. Such an important story, and I'm really very, very happy to be with you.
Awesome. So I was taking a look at your Wikipedia page last week before we were speaking, and it really shows kind of like what we've been able to do in the amount of, let's say, positive influence you've been able to have. I kind of like to first maybe start off with how you got passionate into helping the Soviet Jewry. And I'd really kind of like to get an idea of how that led to you be able to actually advise presidents of the United States and actually create a huge impact. So how did you actually get involved? How did you actually first learn about the Jews of the Soviet Union that were suffering?
Okay, so my story is very typical of all the grassroots activists that were involved with the Soviet Jewry rescue movement. And that is, all of us were born either after or before the Holocaust. And for me, when I was 16, 17 years old, 50s and 60s, I was unable to understand how American Jews could let 1 million children go up the furnaces. Somehow, even as a teenager, I could understand how Europe let it happen, but it was beyond I couldn't even my wildest dreams to imagine how my parents' generation stood complicitly silent and let it happen.
Right.
And when I heard, I was a young mother, I had 3 little kids. I had heard that Jews were being arrested in the Soviet Union. I had heard on news broadcasts.
How did you hear that? How did you hear? Because you said, like, how did American Jewry, how are they so quiet? And
Okay.
the New York Times hid the Holocaust.
Yes.
Right. So and by the way, they still do. They hide war crimes. They're like pro-China with their human rights and their genocide. They hide Iran. They cover for Iran. They cover for the worst regimes in the world. They've done that, and that's not new. We just learned that now because of the internet, right? Of the free information through the internet. Thank God.
And at the time, and I did a lot of research on this, and I've done a lot of course, reading about it at the time. Rabbi Stephen Wise, who was head of the spokesman for the Jewish community and had an access to Roosevelt, really was a propagandist for Roosevelt. And so, he basically was shah still. So I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. And certainly, my book details some of the lessons that I learned from that, including the importance of Peter Cook and what he did, Peter Bergson, and what he did to try to rescue Jews.
You want to fill people in on what they did?
Yeah, Peter Bergson was just an important Jewish hero. He was the nephew of Rav Kook. He changed his name to Bergson not to embarrass his uncle. He started to come to America to try to do something for the recognition of the state of Israel, for Israel. And when he learned about what was happening in Europe, he began to organize and got actors and very prominent actors and writers, people involved in trying to get a message to Roosevelt to open up the refugee lines, and to then later to try to bomb the train lines, and he had huge amount of resistance from the establishment. It's a whole story. I recommend, if you're interested, to read Peters Weinman's book, Abandonment of the Jews. When as I became more sophisticated in my activism and became national president, my goal was not to build an organization, which we already had, but it was more to build a strike force. I learned a lot from that history. So that's how I started when there was a broadcast, a television broadcast on NBC in 1970 about a group of Russian Jews who had been apprehended attempting to hijack a plane from Leningrad to Sweden. And I was, as I said, a young mom, and really wasn't looking for anything to do other than do what I was doing. But it was inconceivable. Jews are not hijackers. Jews are not terrorists. And I went to try to find more information about what had happened. And it took me there was no internet. I wasn't well connected. There was no, took a long time to get information. I finally, as I told you earlier, got information from the Philadelphia Weekly newspaper, which carried an article on Soviet Jewry every week. And one of the things that it said to do on behalf of what was going on in these Jews was to write letters to the Soviet embassy, to write letters to your congressman. And what I learned from as the information started to become more available, what I had discovered was that in the Soviet Union, there was at the time, the second largest Jewish population in the world. They were completely cut off. I mean, today we can't even imagine what it's like, except if we think maybe of North Korea, but of a country that was, 12 time zones going from Japan to Europe, and from, Siberia, from the Arctic Circle practically down to the Black Sea, which was holding captive what we thought at the time was between 3 and 5 million Jews. Unable to have contact with Israel, unable to get information about Israel, unable to have contact with American Jews because all mail was censored, all telephone calls were censored. If there were families that had contact with people in the Soviet Union, if they wanted their letters to get there, they had to be very bland. All mail was monitored for Jews in the Soviet Union. And these Jews, what we learned were these Jews, including the names of people who should be known today, Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich and Silva Zalmanson and Edward Kuznetsov and Hillel Bootman. These people were trying to get permission to leave to come to Israel. And of course, there was no allowed immigration, and there was no way they could tell us in the West that they couldn't leave and they needed help. And so what they decided to do was to send a dramatic flare out of the Soviet Union. And that flare would be to try to hijack a plane, knowing in advance that they would be seized, maybe sentenced to death. And there were 2 death sentences given. They were all apprehended and tried in famous trials called the Leningrad trials. As I said, 2 were given the death sentence, were later commuted, but they were all sentenced to 15 years in hard labor in prison camps. And that sent me off on a mission. I wasn't going to be accused of doing what I felt my parents' generation did. And I set to work doing what this article said, to write the Soviet embassy and write your congressman and get the names of people. And every week there was more information about more people who were trying to leave the Soviet Union, because while the the Leningrad trials attracted people like me in the West. And when there were these trials, by the way, there were demonstrations like in Rome and in Paris, and people took to the streets. In the Soviet Union, even though there was a very strong suppression of all news in all totalitarian countries, I have learned that there is like the whisper network, and information goes underground, and people learned about the trials, and they learned about the really heroic statements of the defendants in those trials. And it raised a kind of pride, and people started to want to leave. It was augmented.
What year is this, Pamela?
That was in 70.
1970.
In 1970. Now, what led these people to want to go to Israel? That would be, maybe your next question. If they didn't know anything about it, how did they even this group try to leave before 70? And it was the 6-Day War that really ignited the burn to try to immigrate to Israel as a homeland. Because even though the Soviet propaganda television networks, state TV was propagandizing the defeat of the Israeli army and showing them as cowards deserting, the troops deserting the mission, so to speak, Jews could see Jewish boys.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the pictures of Jewish boys with guns,
mm-hmm.
defending their homeland. And it was inspirational. It made them realize for the first time that they had a homeland, and that where they could live as proud Jews. And as I said, Jews tried to leave, couldn't, and then these remarkable heroes, tried to take the plane and were sentenced, and the immigration. They were the ones who started this movement. Mm-hmm. And it had the effect of building movements on both sides of the ocean. So from inside the Soviet Union, Jews started after 68 and after 70, started to apply to leave. Were met with crushing resistance by the state. We in the West, little tiny groups of us, I mean, there was no massive organization that was really, working on behalf of people there. We decided that we wanted to be in touch with the people in the Soviet Union, that we didn't want to be paternalistic do-gooders who were patronizing the poor Soviet Jews. We had tremendous respect for Jews in the Soviet Union as moral heroes, with willing to take enormous risks that we couldn't even understand, in defiance of the state and building a resistance movement. And so we set up an underground network to be in touch with their leaders and their spokesmen, take their words, their information, their documentation, and act on what they wanted to secure their futures. And then we developed huge systems of documentation, in which we verified every piece of information that we had, and we built an grassroots advocacy movement. As a young mother, I really did not have any natural ties to either big money or power, but I was really passionate, and I was passionate, and I was a good listener. I could listen and hear what Jews 10,000 miles we're saying. And my goal was to transmit their voices to the West. And because I was somebody who was sincerely devoted to them and their leadership, they developed a tremendous trust in me. And I became the chairman of Chicago Action for Soviet Jewry, where I lived. And in 1986, I became the national president of the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews. There were, just like Chicago Action had a local group of activists, many of us were operating out of our kitchens, many women. My husband helped me, and we did set up an office, and with office systems. My husband's a businessman, and I developed an office structure and systems that were very business-like. But there were at some point during the movement, we had something like almost 50 councils throughout the country, all independent. In other words, I was raising money for Chicago Action for Soviet Jewry. Arizona Council was raising money we were all independent, and yet we banded together to what was like a loose confederation of like-minded, obsessed Jews with securing freedom for their brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union. And one of the you asked how I went from being this young mother to briefing presidents. We were obsessed with documentation, verified documentation. And how we achieved that was developing what I call systematic underground networks. First, we had, and you have to read the book because this was, I have to say it reads a little bit like a spy novel. It's called Hidden Heroes. And we developed these underground systems working with operators. At the time, there was there were operators like at AT&T had their own foreign operators. They were operating out of Pittsburgh, and there were departments that handled the Russian calls. Well, we had developed messenger calls because people's homes.
What's a messenger call? I'm
going to tell you the house phones were monitored by KGB. So if you
the house phone, right, okay. So if you spoke to anyone, if you dialed the house phone, let's say in the KGB, in the Soviet Union, the KGB would be listening on the entire conversation, correct?
Sure.
Even if you're dialing from America.
Yes. And well, you couldn't dial from America. You had to place a call anyway from America. Right. But yes, KGB had, once you apply, let me bring you back a little step, okay? Let's backspace a few steps. Once a refusenik applied for permission to emigrate, it was about 15 steps. One of the steps was that you had to have a visa of an invitation from Israel. Mm-hmm. Now that had to be stamped, postmarked by the Soviets. So since they censored all press, if you, Yoel, were applying for a young man, you're applying for a visa, you need a visa from Israel. That means your postman and the KGB knows that you are in touch with someone in Israel because you've just gotten a letter from them. Now you have this invitation, and you have to take it you can use it with the authorities, but first they will give you a very big application to fill out in which you have to get permission from your parents. Mm-hmm. Now, if your parents have good jobs, and authorities will obviously know that their son has applied for a visa, they're in danger of losing their jobs.
Mhm.
So they may not give you permission to leave.
Your parents, right?
And your parents are coming from another generation anyway, in which they see Israel as a dangerous Zionist state, which
Mhm.
is anti-Soviet. So there were many parents that didn't want to give their children permission, including very famous refuseniks like Vladimir Slepak, may he rest in peace. Then you had to go to your job. Now, let's say you are working at an industrial complex or a factory, or you have to go to your boss. Let's say you have a PhD and you've been doing research in some chemical field. Now you go to your boss and he has to sign off on this application that you're going to this anti-Soviet Zionist state.
Mhm. Right.
He signs off on it, which he will. You will be, the first thing they will do is they will call a meeting of all of your colleagues, everyone you've worked with for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and they will hold a public demonstration in the laboratory denouncing you as really a traitor to their country, and you will be fired. Now you have to have your apartment where you live. Same thing.
Jeez.
Everything in your life, step by step, will be taken from you. All your rights, all your identity as a Soviet citizen, all your social ties, you will be an immediate pariah without a job. And since they know who you are, you will not be able to work. And so as a PhD, you will be lucky if you can find a job in an elevator, as an elevator operator or washing streets. And many PhDs, Russian refuseniks, were put in that position.
Reminds me of modern cancel culture in a way today. Like, that people will pressure you at your job, at your work, in your personal life, in your social life, try to ruin you, try to, what do they say, find out where you live and put it publicly. Because it's crazy how, not from the government, but from the most evil, often socialist parts of modern Western society, is doing the same thing the Soviet Union did.
So I want to tell you, you just hit on the exact reason I am so passionate about people reading this book, because that is exactly the point of this book. And the fact that if you think, and I've spoken to student groups on Zoom like this, if that's social pressure, cancel culture.
Mhm.
Now, that was the beginning steps, as Sharansky talks about in his book, Never Alone. That was the beginning steps that they felt as they were Jews who were starting to be identified as Jews, not getting into the best clubs, not being able to get the best grades, not, a reluctance to be able to be in certain places. So what this book is saying is, right now, our students and our people in America especially are facing the social pressure. Look at these Jews who stood up not to social pressure, but to political, governmental pressure that resulted in the social sense of being a pariah. And they, instead of being bent and being, complicit in this cancel culture and in this system of lies, they stood up. They had moral courage. What I saw over my 25 years, my whole adult lifehood, in the Soviet Union, were people who operated at the top of their game for 18 years. Yulia Kosharovsky was refusing for 18 years. I mean, people ate their pianos. They sold their drapes for food. They went to Siberia. They were sentenced to labor camps. Wives and children were alone. And they weren't sorry. They were proud Jews, and they continue to fight. And that's a message today for our, our people who are facing social pressure, is that the answer is not just to really cower and hide your identity, but to know what it is to be a proud Jew and to stand up for your people, your country. Stand up, fight. There's no alternative. And I think that's really, you just hit the center point of why this book is so important today.
And so why do you think so much would you just say it's human nature? I get this feeling kind of like when I study and read history, and I read about whether it's the refuseniks or even people that have moral courage today, or those in, let's say, North Korea or Iranian dissidents or in Chinese concentration camps. I find that I find that like very few people speak out. It's like, maybe it's like a certain personality, maybe just like in general, maybe every generation, maybe only like 5% of people will have the moral courage or something. Do you think it's something that can be, do you think it's something that's taught, or do you think it's something part, like ingrained part of a personality? Why do you think there's so few people take on moral courage? And today, when it's easier than ever in the West to demonstrate moral courage, people do less and less. And maybe it's because they have more to lose. There's more comfort. Maybe I'm not familiar. Like, what are people going to think when I post things? The social pressure. Why is there such a lack of moral courage throughout time? And how do you think moral courage, the few courageous moral voices today, how do they hold up against those in the past?
Okay, so your first question is why? I do not believe it's inborn. I believe that everyone has free choice. You have choice.
Right, I agree with that.
And I think it's a willingness to be able to look, to be self-deceptive, or to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and face the truth. I think that the materialism in the West is so incredibly, in America, I can only speak about America, is so incredibly corrupting, that getting ahead, being the best in college, getting a good job, making money is so of such value. Living a good life, being able to play golf, and it's like taking a needle, almost, and a hypodermic needle, and putting it in your vein. It blurs your ability to see. You've been bought you've been bribed by the materialism. Now, they had much more to lose in Russia. I mean, much more to lose. In America, you're right. You can lose your social status. You could lose. You stand up for a professor. You could lose your grade, but you're not going to lose your life at this point. Although I have to tell you that I know people that have said, "Gee, isn't he afraid to wear a kippah in Brooklyn?" So at what point? How much are we willing to, how far do you go to delude yourself?
Right.
And that, I think it's a question of self-delusion. And I think that there are, as you said, the dissidents in China, was South Africa, everywhere, where there is, the most important dissident, I think of him a lot. In fact, we had a meeting with Sharansky a few weeks ago, and we went into his office, and he knows he's with every person, every president, and there's one picture. It's a huge, life-size, breathtaking oil painting of Andrei Sakharov. Now, Andrei Sakharov should be on every person's list.
Can you fill people in who he is?
Yeah, he was he developed the hydrogen bomb for Stalin. He, not Stalin, it was for the Soviets. He cried when Stalin, he was a child when Stalin died. He developed the hydrogen bomb. He was a brilliant, brilliant physicist at the highest level of the Soviet society, who became a dissident. He wasn't Jewish. He was married to Yelena Bonner, who was a Jew, and they went to the trials of the dissidents and broadcast information to the West about what was happening in the trials. He was,
how did he do that? How do you go to a Soviet trial with such high status, obviously within the government too, and the government, obviously, this guy's a very important asset in a sense. You could say, like, when they say like someone's uncancelable, right? The Soviets didn't want to lose him.
Although they did.
Right.
They actually, I mean, he actually walked into the courtrooms. I mean, there was very little that they could do to drag him out. I mean, all the courtrooms were always packed with KGB. One time we happened, by the way, it's an interesting aside and it's in the book. One time from Chicago, we also sent tourists. We briefed Americans, 18 hours of briefings to send them to refusix and bring out information, bring them information.
Wow.
We had a young American student who went to Leningrad and was with a whole bunch of the activists during Yevgeny Lenin's trial, who was an underground Hebrew teacher in Leningrad. And he forced himself in with the American consulate in the trial and was able to get pictures out. But they were rough. People who got in were roughed up. They wanted to suppress these show trials, the information, but Sakharov did, and if he couldn't get in, he got the information and held press conferences.
What do you mean what press would cover him? I mean, it's not like
all the American press covered him.
Got it. But how would they come? Where would they see him? Right? He'd be in the Soviet Union. American press didn't show up. I don't understand how did that information get out?
Okay, because the reason Natan Sharansky was so dangerous to the Soviets was because he spoke such great English, and because he had a great sense of humor. He interlocked, and he believed that the Jewish movement should interlock with the wider dissident movement, which made him a bit of a problem for the Israeli government, by the way. But he interlocked with the dissident movements, and they were able to have go to somebody, bring 15 people or 10 dissidents to an apartment and call Howard Tyner from the Tribune or any of the New York Times reporters. And in those days, we briefed those heads of the bureaus, and they were Soviets. Jews briefed those bureau heads, and you would go into an apartment, and Dina Balina, who was right here in Jerusalem, would often speak at these, and they would tell the press what was happening. Often, I mean, there were times when press were beaten up. I remember very clearly and all this is in the book. I remember very clearly when my contact on the telephone, Natasha Beckman, was in Moscow, and there was a demonstration for Yosef Begun, who was an underground Hebrew teacher. And there was American press there, and quote unquote hooligans came and beat up. Natasha was, I mean, I saw her on television. She was on the ground. They were beating her. And I think it was Peter Arnett, even from, I forgot what news station he was from, was roughed up and cameras broken. But at the time, in the 70s, this Andrei Sakharov spoke on behalf of the dissidents and warned the West about the dangers of the Soviet Union. It's such a message today to Biden. He said that a nation that makes war on its own people cannot be trusted not to make war against its enemies.
Right.
He was the supreme spokesman for and brilliant. And I think about him so much in the confusion of today's world. We don't have an Andrei Sakharov. But in those days, what we had in the movement, in the grassroots movement, and by the way, it wasn't pervasive. I mean, I remember a time in Chicago when Rakunkov, who was the Soviet prosecutor who was sending Jews to Siberian labor camps, came to Chicago, and he was met as a Soviet barrister by the Chicago Bar Association, and was feted at the Jewish Country Club. I mean, but among the grassroots movement in the West, in America, in England and in France, there was an ability that the refuseniks gave us, that we inherited from them, that has marked us, and an ability to see good and evil, which the lines are blurred today. There is no good and evil today. There is no right and wrong. What's right for you is right for you.
It's all subjective, right? There's no objective truth. There's no objective morality, nothing, right?
These refuseniks were what I called in my book hidden heroes, because they saw that. They saw that there was truth. They saw that, at the time, there was a very strong peace movement in America and in the West. You're too young to remember that, but at the time when the nuclear buildup on both sides, and there was negotiations and SALT talks, and especially during the Reagan years, when he felt negotiate to strength, he built this idea of Star Wars and as a missile defense system. There was a very strong really left-wing movement for peace, and that all people are the same. Everybody wants.
Yeah. John
everybody,
Lennon. Imagine. Such garbage. They don't even think the same. It's such garbage.
And so many people bought it.
People still buy it because the idiots push it. Like Al Gadot, who's like saying it. She said it was a mistake. Now with all like the celebrities in Hollywood, they were singing. You can imagine. I was like, do you even hear what you're saying? Like, this makes no sense. It's so anti-human nature. It's such bullshit. And of course, ironically, these people are the most violent and hostile against the people that are most pro-freedom, pro-liberty. It comes from a place of wealthy Western righteousness. It's classism in a way. It really is. People that think that they think they're better off than anyone else and all that. And
smarter.
Right. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, intellect and goodness isn't correlated, which is what I always say. I'll take good over smart any day.
Me too.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. So you would tell me about, you were saying, so how did you manage to actually create a bigger impact, let's say, and reach the American government? Because so you try to work closely with the press, you worked with other people on the grassroots, to try to communicate. You worked with those going to the Soviet Union or covering what's going on with refuseniks to get the information out, which is fantastic. How'd you make a big difference when it came to governments, let's say? What kind of pushback did you get, and how do you navigate trying to get influence for a government when they have a bunch of their own interests that can often be counter of that of human rights, and often you're not even aware of what those interests are because they're kept secret?
Okay, so first of all, we had designed this strategy that was inherent in the grassroots capacity. So what I mean by grassroots, for example, like each council represented, like Chicago Action, we had, it was usually in a city, and that council was more or less responsible for every congressional office in their state. So if you were in a small, if we had, for example, I don't know, Cincinnati committee, they were responsible for every the 2 senators and all their congressional reps in Washington from the state of Ohio. And how they did that was that it was systematic. As we developed this case log in thousands of refuseniks that we had to defend one neshama at a time, one family at a time, we realized we couldn't handle the caseload in our volunteer offices. So we allocated a refusenik case to one synagogue. Each synagogue in the state would have a case. Now so every synagogue in the state of Illinois was given a case, and that social action committee chairman or the rabbi, whoever it was responsible in generating publicity for that case, reaching out to that refusenik and contacting their congressman and senator about that case. And all the information that we had, as information came in to, say, for Chicago Action, we distributed the information on a case-by-case basis to every synagogue who had that case. And it wasn't only synagogues that did it. Well, we had like the American Physical Society, physicists who we assigned a physicist case. We had the medical, we had psychiatrists for a psychiatrist. So we delegated. And so if you had, even just say even 10 synagogues in Illinois, and they're hawking their congressman about Soviet Jewry and these cases, and they were sending postcard campaigns to their congressmen and their senators. That raised the level of understanding and knowledge from the aide in that congressional office that was dealing in foreign affairs. Now we had in all of our offices, all of the councils, we had one person who was dealing with the congressman and the senators, a congressional action chairman. So from Chicago Action and from Miami, from everywhere in these 40 councils, we would send advocacy papers asking congressmen to get this particular Secretary of State to raise this list of refuseniks at the next bilateral meeting with the Soviets. This information on a case basis, on a congressional, on a case basis and on a legislative basis, was raised on various levels, both from synagogues, from individuals, from our office, and then from our national office. So we were able to enlist a lot of congressmen. For example, I'll give you 2 examples. From the 10th district in when I was Chicago Action chairman, Congressman John Porter and his executive aide, who became congressman himself, Kirk. Porter went to Russia. We sent him to Russia to meet refuseniks. He came back. He started a human rights caucus in the House of Representatives. It wasn't a congressional committee. It couldn't vote, but it was a way for the Congress to officially disseminate information to other congressmen. We also had, as of 1974, we had congressional issues which put Soviet Jewry on the official officially as a function of the U.S.-Soviet relations. So in
No,
1974,
how does one do that? I mean, I understand. So you send a bunch of letters so the aides of Congress people would know that this is important, and therefore that conversation would be held with the congressperson. And then would you try to work through the caucus, the Human Rights Caucus? You organize different Congress people to be able to then discuss these topics, and then walk me through, because I'm hoping some of our listeners here might have some moral courage. They don't know how to channel it. They don't know what to do. They see a lot of injustices in the world, and they want to make a positive change for human rights and for the Jewish people in Israel. And they don't know how to navigate these waters. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to start. Maybe you can kind of give people a little bit of how they can not just listen when it comes to governments, what kind of influence you can have, if that's even possible anymore.
You know what? It is possible. I think it is possible. So I had some ideas about it during the Intifada, but it just never panned out. First of all, in terms of seeing a relationship between the two issues, okay? What we had in our advantage, which we haven't been able to do here because I don't see the leadership yet that was able to do it. In the Soviet Union, refuseniks signed mass appeals. I mean, 72 refuseniks would sign an appeal to, say, George Shultz, or to the American Jewish leadership, or even to the government of Israel, that we were able to smuggle out and publish. And then we could go into a congressional office or into the State Department. And we were speaking from authority. Not only did we have our own grassroots members, I mean, after all, a congressman saw that we were kind of controlling all these synagogues, and they want to be reelected. So we had the support of Democrats and Republicans because their constituents were demanding that they put Soviet Jewry high on their list. Now, what did they do with that? They put influence. They helped us try to influence the State Department and the Helsinki Commission, other international agencies where the United States played a role. One of the things that we did, so for example, during the Intifada, I'm trying to remember, that might have been the first one. Somebody called me and said, "Can't you do something? Can't you do something?" Well, I did send Mark Kirk here. I did send it with my congressman, and I sent him to meet with former refuseniks that he had met with in Russia. And they explained to him what was happening and how come they can't, if they lived at a front, they can't get through the tunnels because they were being blocked. And he came back and he was incensed. He understood from grassroots what was going on here. We sent people to Russia. And then now one of the things that what we did was that we had the moral, we were given authority by the refuseniks. So during the Intifada, I was hoping that we could get all the mayors of, 15 different places in Israel that was being hit, from Sderot to Ashkelon to blah, 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 and to put a dear colleague letter together for a congressman, and then send someone to America with either Americans for a Safe Israel or, one of the really strong grassroots organization, and congressmen go to office to office to office to office to explain what is happening. But I don't know if that and it's the grassroots. It's somebody you take somebody who has a lot of appeal, someone who is charismatic, someone who has the backing of 15 other neighborhoods that are being attacked by missiles, and you take them and you go into the office with them, and then you take them to the. Now with Russia, it was easier in that there was only one Soviet desk. at the State Department.
Right.
But we also had a Secretary of State for Humanitarian Affairs, Dick Shifter, may he rest in peace, who raised cases for us. But we took it to every place that we could go, and we used the press on in a grassroots way. For example, one of the things I thought of was like we had a Hebrew teacher that I was very close to in Moscow was exiled to Gorky. And by the way, the Soviets did exile Sakharov. They sent him to Gorky so that he would be silenced. He couldn't have contact with all the press. And he was given the Nobel Prize and wasn't allowed to go. And his wife, Yelena Bonner, was out of the country for an eye operation. She was allowed to go because of public pressure, and she accepted it from. These were a remarkable people. And but you have to have an all-over strategy. And I think that that's one of the things. So when Relvosky was arrested, we gathered in Highland Park. It may not sound like a big deal. We gathered in a suburb, and we sent off hundreds of helium balloons that say "Free Volvosky." Well, the press loved it. Now, if you go to Washington and you send out 10,000 helium balloons to show what a missile is, and maybe that makes a difference with the press.
Yeah, but we're very bad at visual. People don't understand. Israelis don't understand media. I speak to people like, well, just speak the truth. I'm like, truth doesn't work against evil, darling.
Well, you know what, Joe, I want to tell you, it cannot be the government. That's the difference. We didn't count on either the Israeli government or the American government. When I'm talking about sending up balloons, I'm talking about, somebody coming from Sderot with a little kid who was hurt in the thing and being the spokesman at a demonstration where you're sending up balloons.
Exactly.
And you're right. The government does no idea how to do PR, and we're working at a disadvantage. We're working at a disadvantage because you've got on the campuses, you've got some Palestinian organizations that are very sophisticated. And
I fought them tooth and nail at Temple University. They are terrible, evil anti-Semites, and they're supported by the dean.
Yes.
And I'm talking 18 years. I'm talking 18 years ago. I'm not talking about even recently. They were supported by the dean. There are swastikas all over my friends' cars, our fraternity house, everything, and they dismissed it. And then we got together to have a town hall at the Hillel. And then left-wing anti-Semites, Muslims showed up to boycott. They shouldn't be at a Hillel. This is not a partial ground. That is like it's unbelievable. And the support of anti-Semitism from faculty, not to mention the students, then was mind-numbing. There was a point at Temple University where I attended my undergrad. They had a whole marketing thing on billboards. It was like inspiration, and then like the T at the TION would be like the Temple T, the logo, motivation, you know what I mean, or whatever the different words, the word T in it, they put in the T logo. It was a cute marketing campaign. So I made these stickers that said anti-Semitism in the cherry and white Temple University goes with the Temple logo. And then turned out the dean came in, and then when the faculty came in and approached me on it, because I put the stickers up on the poles and on the, I don't care, what are you going to do to me? I can let people know there's anti-Semitism on campus, and it is supported by Temple University. And and people thought I were crazy. My fraternity brothers, just off doing his crazy things again. And, but it started to get people a little bit talking. And a lot of students, the overwhelming majority that were ignorant and indifferent, I'm not talking about Jewish students in general, then they're like, oh, what's this? I'm against anti-Semitism, whatever. They don't know what's going on. They don't care. They don't understand. And so when it comes up and it speaks, then I would do marketing for events that I would hold. They tie the two things together and they kind of understand it. Oh, yeah, we have an anti-Semitism problem on campus. They don't know what. They don't care. They weren't going to take any action. But awareness was just, some awareness as opposed to, it was shallow, but mass awareness was suddenly I was able to provide on campus.
That's
And
amazing.
that's why I say that people don't have, I think, the courage to do it. And, when.
I mean, we need some strategic thinkers ourselves, because we
Mhm.
need to be able to go to the alumni. And there are
Oh,
alumni.
yeah. Imtar Sood did something great, because when you have
Stop funding this school.
it's unreal. I always say, and then I have an MBA too, I would say universities are just evil places that just teach anti-Semitism backwards. It's not going to help you get a job. Even what you do learn in your career, what you learn in school isn't relevant tomorrow anyway. It's not relevant today. I'm a marketer. Whatever you're going to learn in a marketing degree, even from the best business school, what you're learning right now is not relevant. It's not what we're doing anymore, right? What's printed in the textbook, I think, is not relevant. That was several years ago. You're not even prepared for employment or anything. You wasted time, money, the best years of your life. I tell you, if you take the money for college and you just invest it, congratulations, you can retire at 50. You know what I mean? With $5 million, $10 million. Go spend 4 years of your life. It's unbelievable how what people do. But yeah, universities are definitely backwards, and there is a problem that people don't know how to properly frame things to understand the media. And I always say, like, I don't understand why people don't use terminology, even including the Israeli government, is that we're not going to let non-Jewish countries negotiate the genocide of the Jewish people. That's what's happening with Iran. And I don't know why no one from the government says that. We don't want to offend Biden or Obama or Trump. And I was like, just say what it is. They're negotiating.
Have you met with anybody? Can you meet with anybody? Can't you meet with
I
somebody?
don't know. You want to connect me? You can connect me. I would love to. I made a video on it for the channel. We don't have a lot of subscribers.
No, you have to go to, you have to find someone from the Knesset, a member of the Knesset. Go to Yuli. I don't know where Yuli Edelstein is anymore.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Go to
I would love to
Yuli.
connect with them. I don't know how to go to these people. If you want to connect me, I would love to have these. But I understand media. Pamela, I understand media and messaging extremely well. I have a very good ear for it and a very good tongue for it. I don't know why or how, because even in college, I wasn't even interested in it so much. It's just, I understand how to properly communicate in order to get these things across, because people often speak from their perspective. They don't speak to the emotional perspective of the people they're trying to reach. And, I don't understand why there should be a full front for World Indigenous Day, should be a Zionist movement. When they say this not state of Israel, they need to say the third state of Israel, because it's the people. Just saying that, that's what I say. Happy, independence for the third state of Israel. People need to understand, like, we are as indigenous as any indigenous people get. But there's just these simple nuances changes the whole framing for the conversation. But people are just, people just want to offend. I don't want someone to maybe, an anti-Semite to attack me on Twitter, God forbid, the worst place in the world. After university, probably worse. It's unbelievable, but people don't know how to communicate.
Yeah.
It's very tragic, and the lack of courage, which is why I wonder if I asked you earlier if it's a personality thing. Some people are just kind of like stubborn and they understand it's wrong. You know what I mean? Like when I talk to people about what's going on, just saying in China, and then they'll say, "Oh yeah, well I don't want to talk about politics," and I'm like, no, honey, that's not politics. Like, we can talk and argue about politics. Like, if you want, like, that's not politics. You want to talk church and state? Like, that's politics.
The difference between policy and politics is huge.
No, but you understand the reason why one would say that it's politics is that way of saying that I don't want to address it and I don't want to have to take more. I don't want to take more responsibility because I'm doing business or doing things that might be supporting a regime that's squashing on human rights. That is why. So then what do I do? And then so I say that. So I mean, you called them out. I've been like, is concentration camps politics? Yes or no?
Yeah,
they just you ask them, and I don't mind. People want to hate me, they can hate me. I'm fine. I'll do very well.
Can I tell you, this is maybe politically incorrect to say to you, but as somebody who grew up and matured under the tutelage of Andrei Sakharov and people like him, if you think I can understand how the world could sit here and allow an invasion of another country and have the Americans say that they are going to pull out the embassy from from the capital of an ally is so foreign to me. It's so, it's just Israel's in a different position. I'm not putting Israel in that position. Israel has always been in a different position with Russia, but it's just this this placid worldview that anything goes and don't make waves, and there's no understanding in my way of thinking that if you don't stop Hitler with the Sudetenland, with Czechoslovakia, you're going to pay an ultimate price. And I don't understand how the world doesn't understand that. You know, if you allow anti-Semitism in America on the college campuses, you're opening a door that you're not going to be able to close.
People feel that they have no voice because people are scared to say something. Because and the fact that you had it to say that it may be politically incorrect to say already means that you know you might say something that people either don't want to hear, or there's a little bit of discomfort in saying something which is true. You know, and I think we need to stop saying it might be politically incorrect to say. I think the proper response before you were to say something that would be quote unquote politically incorrect is say, I'm going to make a moral statement and then say it, because that's how people, I think,
I like that much better.
It's much better. Just say, I want to make I'm going to make a moral statement, and then say what it is, because then you hear people and they're like, oh, great, more someone just want to say something that's not accepted. Maybe because a lot of things that are politically incorrect are wrong and evil and bigoted and all that. Just because it's politically incorrect doesn't mean you have the moral high ground, right? But many things that are politically correct is the moral and correct thing to do. So I think being more precise in our speech and just saying, I'm going to say something morally accurate, right? You know what I mean? Or morally relevant. But right, this is the thing. So everyone with this, we're using the terminology that I think that the media has taken the words politically incorrect, which was, let's say, in the early 90s, you know, when Bill Maher had a show called Politically Incorrect, where being politically correct is a way to kind of say things that are stated that wouldn't be right to kind of say to a wide audience, right? To discuss, you know, the taboo truths that you and I, that every human being feels in their real life and in their real communications, and the people they meet on the subways, you know, in their real interactions. But that's not what it means anymore. Politically incorrect is a way to try to say something this is outside of the Overton window of conversation. And I think we need to move the Overton window not over to politically incorrect, but into moral righteousness. And I think so. I think we should stop using the word. I know this may be politically incorrect. I think we need to say, hey, I know this might be morally centered before we say things that, because if not,
I like that a lot. And then they can disagree with you whether it's morally centered, because they're going to say,
let them disagree, not with political incorrectness. Let them defend their immorality. Yes,
I like it much better.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. This is simple as like this is just communication 101. Well, not 101. I mean, many people don't know this, but this is why I'm very, I'm very passionate in media and marketing and communication, is for that, but is to understand how to properly communicate to get your message across to people you want to. I wanted to discuss a little bit, to shift gears, kind of talk about immigration to Israel from those from the Soviet Union. Tell me a bit. So, over like a million Russian speakers moved to Israel. And I know that was a strong pivot in conversation, but I kind of wanted to hear from you. So every aliyah, all right, for those that don't know, aliyah are people that immigrate to Israel. Every aliyah brings something different. And there were people from from, let's say, Russia, or let's say Eastern Europe, that made aliyah in the late 1800s, the first and second waves of aliyah. What do you think is the difference between those that made aliyah then, and then those that made from the same population, that made aliyah from the former Soviet Union? Do you see a connection kind of between them culturally or whatnot, and personality and work ethic or something? And how do you think in general the Russian aliyah is different from other aliyahs in, let's say, in the last 40 years?
First of all, I have to say that I'm really not equipped to answer the first question. in any depth. All I could say is that one remarkable difference between the first aliyahs of Russia and Poland, Eastern Europe, and the aliyah that came after 1970, is one remarkable difference, and that in the early aliyahs, especially the beginning of the 20th century, when socialism was just developing, and even later, like by 1917 and between 1905 and 1917, when people were coming here, many Jews were infected still with the idea of socialism, and brought the kibbutz movement and the socialist ideas to Israel. The aliyah from the Soviet Union had already suffered tremendously from the time of the revolutions to after Stalin, and they were no longer smitten with the idea of socialism. That's the only thing that I could say. I know that I think that just things that I know that is that because there were so little outlets for creativity in the Soviet Union, Russians generally have a much higher sensitivity to culture, music, art. It played a much bigger part of their life than those of us in America. Other than that, I realize I'm really not equipped to answer that first part. The second part, now I really feel strongly about, and that is people talk about, just in references, people talk about the French aliyah, the American aliyah, the aliyah from England, Africa, any of it. The Soviet aliyah was markedly different. Because whether or not you want to recognize it, or even they recognize it, it has to be seen that aliyah, in my opinion, is a miraculous one. Mm-hmm. I was here in 1984.
Just for those know, here is Israel. You're in Jerusalem.
Yeah, in Jerusalem, and an international and a national conference. It was the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews, along and two very, very prestigious, prominent refuseniks from Leningrad had just gotten out. Maybe it was 83. They had just gotten out of Russia. Both of them were brilliant men, brilliant. And I had never met them. Levutevsky was one of them. For me, he was a very, very important strategist and explained a consultant for me all the time I was president of the union, explaining what was happening with Soviet law and what was happening with the Council of Ministers and what this law meant. I had many refuseniks in Israel who had emigrated, who really were my consultants. And I remember him introducing himself and saying, "Don't you understand what happened in the doctor's plot? Do you understand? It was only the death of Stalin that prevented a mass transfer of Jews, like in cattle cars to Siberia." Wow. It was only, and that's what could be happen now. Don't you understand what is happening in the Soviet Union? They're arresting people. You understand the arrests in the 80s where every night my phone was ringing in the middle of the night at my home line with news that someone else had been arrested. I mean, we expected a catastrophe. This aliyah, the fact that the gates opened is something we never, ever expected. Even in retrospect, I mean, it wasn't only until retrospect that I realized that, that we never anticipated any more than, at the most, you look at this, some years there were 73 Jews allowed to leave. And I knew every one of them. They were part of my
Wow.
network. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of Jews waiting to apply, not only leave. And I want to tell you one thing that what I came to realize. First of all, I came to realize in my book, when I was writing my book, in retrospect, going over 25 years of doing this work as a volunteer, by the way, day and night, in those days, 7 days a week, 24/7. I have to say that as I read the book, I realized, number one, there were no accidents. Things happened to me that could not have happened. Things happened that were so remarkable that, I mean, and you see them in the book. I mean, you need a heart transplant. You need someone needs a heart transplant. The doctors will not give this Jew in Riga, no, excuse me, a heart valve, sorry, a heart valve. They won't give this Jew a valve. They won't give it. She can't get the valve.
Mm-hmm.
She can find someone who will do the surgery, but you can't. Where am I going to get a heart valve and take it to Russia? Within 2 hours, some doctor calls us and said, by the way, if you ever need a heart valve, I got one. Within 36 hours, she had the valve. I get a telephone call from Natasha Beckman, wherever you are in if we're now in Israel, saying, we send Alan Dershowitz or Erwin Kotler, big names. We need them for to defend a refusement. Mm-hmm. I remember the day I was going to the opera. It was 4 o'clock in Chicago. What am I going to do? How am I going to get Erwin Kotler? How am I going to get Dershowitz?
This is before the internet too. For those that are listening, often we forget this is before the internet, before cell phones, before email, before any of that.
I can reach them. They've got to get visas. I got to convince them why they got to go. Then they got to apply for a visa. They need an attorney, and I can't say anything on the phone. I said, okay, I'll do my best. I hung up the phone. 4 minutes later, my phone rings. Who is it? It's Harvey Burnett. He's not Dershowitz and he's not a Kotler, but he doesn't have the name, but he's a foremost attorney. We're sending him on the second trip to Russia. I told him, when you land in Leningrad, when you land in London, call me, because from London, I can tell you if there's something that we need you to do first when you land in Moscow. He calls me 2 minutes after the phone. I said, he calls me, he says, okay, I'm in London. I'll be in Moscow in 4 hours. I said, Harvey, I just got a telephone call from Beckman. Go there immediately. They need an attorney. He gets to Moscow. He knocks on Beckman's door, and he's got a great sense of humor. And he's knocking on the door, and he says, sorry, I'm late. I got hung up in traffic. He was the attorney you wanted. So, I mean, they thought we could do anything because there were things that happened that just, whatever we needed,
miracles,
just happened.
Real unbelievable miracles. Go ahead.
And the other thing that I realized at the end, when I look back, I thought, it says that it was our divisiveness that caused the destruction of the temple and the dispersion, the Jewish dispersion. And I think about, I get welled up about it even today. When I think about the love between the Jews that I worked with in America and England and France, and the Jews in Novosibirsk and in Moscow and Leningrad and Odessa, there was love, there was unity. You couldn't sit at a table in America in these homes without having a refusnik present on their Shabbos table. They were twinning bar mitzvahs with them. They were going to Russia. They were calling them. They were sending them everything they could do. They were part of the family. And I was thinking that this unity, that this tremendous unity between Jews in America and Jews in this former Soviet Union literally created some kind of a cosmic force that opened the gates, that cracked open the Soviet Union itself. And I think that there's a lesson that we can't be separate from our people, that You know, you may, if you're living in America, the Jews in Israel have to be the first people that you think about. You've got to be thinking about your brothers, your people on a campus. We're only a very few, a really small section of the world's population. And we, Taki, are responsible for each other, period.
Yeah, it really is, right. And it's not easy too, right? At the end of the day, no one's really going to look out for you as an individual, and often your family, and then even as a people. That's really, unfortunately, it's all we have. But we're blessed to have a country that we can defend it, and most importantly, we're really blessed that we have people that have moral courage, moral character, and have no fear, such as yourself, such as the Refuseniks that you worked with to help liberate the Jews from the Soviet Union. Pamela, I wanted to thank you very much for your time. Can you hold up your book one last time so people can have the opportunity to see they can buy it? So yeah, Hidden Heroes. One of those heroes is behind that book, holding it up, Pamela. Pamela, thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate for you being a guest. I absolutely love this conversation. Hopefully, we can take things moving forward.
I really love it. I found somebody who I could, really gets it.
Where can people follow you? Where can people find you or follow you if they want to reach out to you?
I have there is a Hidden Heroes, the book website, and my email is there. You could reach out to me through that.
Awesome. Okay, so Google Hidden Heroes book. We'll put the link in the description.
Yeah, and it's, by the way, it's available for sale on Amazon and at Geffen here in Israel.
Awesome. Great. We'll make sure to put that over in the description. Pamela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.